The plains had turned wild that evening, a roaring sea of dust and wind that swallowed the horizon whole. The sun had vanished hours early, snuffed out by a storm rolling like the end of days. Elias Carter rode hunched in the saddle, his scarf drawn high over his mouth, hat pulled low. His horse, a big gray gelding named Boone, fought each gust with stubborn strength, hooves sinking into the softening ground. Every instinct told Elias to turn back, find cover, wait it out. But the ranch lay just a few miles east, and he could already picture the warm light in the window, the smell of stew left on the stove by his foreman's wife. He muttered to himself, a habit born of long days alone. "Just a little further, boy. We'll make it." But the words were carried off by the wind before Boone could even flick an ear. Then something changed. Through the wall of dust, a dark shape flickered, not moving but still half buried. Elias pulled on the reins, squinting through grit-stung eyes. He almost rode past, thinking it might be driftwood or a dead coyote. Then lightning split the sky, and in that white flash he saw it clearly. A hand, pale against the sand, reaching up from the earth. He was off the horse before he even thought. The storm clawed at him as he dropped to his knees, digging with his bare hands. Each scoop of sand revealed more of a human shape, a woman, young, her face streaked with blood and dirt, her dark hair matted with grit. She wasn't dead, not yet. He could see the faint tremor of breath. Her clothes were torn, made of soft doeskin and beadwork, the kind worn by the tribes west of the river. Elias's heart kicked hard against his ribs. Easy now, easy. He didn't know who she was or what she'd been through, but there was no time to wonder. He tore off his coat and wrapped it around her, shielding her from the cutting sand. Boone whickered nervously, tugging at the reins, but Elias didn't move until he was sure she was breathing steady. The wind screamed louder. It was suicide to stay. He lifted the woman into his arms, lighter than a sack of feed, her skin ice cold, and hoisted her onto Boone's saddle. He mounted behind her, one arm around her to keep her steady, and turned the horse east toward home. Every mile was a battle against the storm's fury. Grit scraped his eyes raw, the air stung his lungs. But the thought of leaving her there, a stranger, helpless and alone, was something he couldn't do, not even to save himself. When they finally reached the ranch, the night was black as coal. The barn door slammed in the wind as Elias dismounted and carried her inside. The ranch hands stared wide-eyed as he pushed past them. "Boil water," he ordered. "Clean rags, whiskey, bandages, whatever we've got." He laid her down by the fire, her pulse faint but steady. The flickering light caught the glint of a silver amulet around her neck, a small carving of a hawk, wings spread. Elias studied it for a long moment, knowing it meant something sacred. He whispered almost to himself, "Who are you, girl? And what in God's name happened to you out there?" Outside, the storm howled across the plains, erasing her tracks as if the earth itself wanted to hide the truth of where she came from. Elias didn't yet know that by saving her, he had just called a circle of destiny around his ranch, one that would close by sunrise. Morning broke gray and heavy. The plains washed clean after the night's storm. The air still carried the scent of wet dust and sage. Inside the ranch house, the fire burned low, throwing a soft glow over the figure lying on Elias Carter's bed, the woman he'd found half buried in the storm. She stirred at last, her eyes fluttering open. They were dark, not just in color but in depth, like deep wells holding 100 secrets. When she tried to sit, pain shot through her leg and she fell back with a soft cry. Elias, who had been half dozing in a chair beside her, leaned forward quickly. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice gentle. "You're safe here. Don't try to move." She flinched at his voice, shrinking back as though expecting harm. Elias stopped immediately, raising both hands in peace. "No harm meant. You were hurt bad. I just couldn't leave you out there." Her gaze darted around the room, taking in the strange walls, the furniture, the fire. She whispered something, soft, musical, in a language he didn't know. Her lips formed the word, water. Elias understood that much. He poured from a jug and handed it to her slowly. She hesitated, then drank in trembling sips. He saw then how young she truly was, maybe 20, no more. Her skin was sun-browned, her face strong but delicate, and there was intelligence in her eyes that spoke of pride, not fear. But she didn't speak again, not even when he asked her name. The ranch hands whispered outside the door. Word had spread fast that Elias had brought an Apache girl into his home. That alone could bring trouble. The borderlands between settlers and the Apache were uneasy. Peace one week, bloodshed the next. Some men didn't need a reason to start a fight, and a wounded native woman was reason enough. When Elias stepped outside to fetch supplies, his foreman, Cal, spat into the dirt. "You know what this looks like, boss. You bring one of them into your house, her people'll think you took her. They'll come for her. And for you." Elias fixed him with a hard look. "She was dying. What kind of man leaves a person to die?" Cal's jaw tightened. "The kind that wants to live, maybe." Elias said nothing more. He gathered clean rags, salve, and broth, then went back inside. The girl's eyes followed him warily as he cleaned the wound on her leg, a deep gash, likely from a fall or blade. She winced but didn't pull away. He spoke softly while he worked, not because he thought she understood, but because silence made her tremble. "Name's Elias Carter. Rancher out by the Willow Creek. You'll be all right here. Just need rest." When he finished, he offered her a bowl of broth. She took it, her hands shaking slightly. For the first time, her lips curved faintly. Not a smile, but something close. She touched her chest lightly, then said, "Naya." Elias repeated it softly. "Naya, that your name?" She didn't answer, but the flicker of warmth in her eyes told him he'd guessed right. Outside, Boone neighed sharply. On the far ridge, a rider paused against the horizon before vanishing into the morning haze. Elias didn't see it, but one of the hands did, and his face went pale. That evening, as the sun sank and the wind died, Elias lit a lantern in the window, his quiet signal to any soul passing through that this was a house of peace. He didn't yet know that the same light would be seen by others, by riders who watched from the ridges, their eyes glinting with vengeance and fear. Naya lay awake long after Elias had dozed off in his chair. Her body ached, but it wasn't pain that kept her awake. It was the memory of the men who had hunted her and the knowledge that her people would come looking. They would find her here, in a white man's house, and to them that would mean only one. The sun rose blood-red over the plains the next morning, the kind of dawn that made old-timers mutter about omens. The storm had cleared, but the air held a strange stillness, heavy with tension. Elias Carter stepped onto the porch with a tin mug of coffee in hand, scanning the horizon. To the west, the land stretched empty and endless, or so it seemed. He'd been born on these plains and knew they rarely stayed empty for long. Behind him, the ranch was waking. Chickens scratched near the barn, and the hands were saddling horses for the morning rounds. Yet conversation was quieter than usual. Eyes kept drifting toward the ranch house, toward the shuttered window of the room where the rescued woman, Naya, rested. By mid-morning, Elias saddled Boone and rode out to check the southern fence line, hoping for quiet and clarity. Instead, he found neither. About 2 miles out, he spotted something odd, faint impressions in the dirt, where horses had stood watching, many of them. The tracks led to a rise overlooking the ranch, then vanished into the rocky hills. He crouched, touching the prints. Riders had been there, and not long ago. When he returned, his foreman Cal was waiting by the corral, face grim. "You see the smoke?" Cal asked, pointing westward. Elias squinted. Sure enough, a thin column rose from the bluffs. Not a ranch fire, not an accident. "Signal fire," Cal said. "Old Indian sign. Means they're talking." Elias dismounted, jaw tight. "Could mean a lot of things." Cal spat into the dust. "Could mean we're surrounded." Before Elias could answer, another rider appeared on the trail, Sheriff Colby, a lean man with a voice like gravel. His horse was lathered, his badge glinting in the harsh light. "Carter," he said as he reined in, "word's traveling fast. They say you got an Apache woman here." Elias's tone was calm but firm. "I found her near dead after the storm. Brought her in, patched her up." Colby looked unimpressed. That's mighty Christian of you, but it's also mighty foolish. You know how this looks. Their people vanish. We start finding white men dead in their wake. Now one of theirs goes missing and she turns up under your roof. You've just written your own death notice. I didn't take her, Elias replied, voice steady. I saved her. There's a difference. The sheriff dismounted and walked a few paces closer, lowering his voice. You can mean well all you want, but the land don't care about meaning. Folks out here live on fear, and fear don't listen to reason. If her people come, they won't ask questions first. They'll just burn this place to the ground. Elias crossed his arms. If they come, I'll face a man-to-man. But I won't turn her out, not after what she's been through. Colby studied him for a long moment. You're a good man, Carter. But out here, kind hearts get buried first. With that, he mounted and rode off, leaving a trail of dust behind him. When Elias returned inside, he found Naya sitting up for the first time. Her leg was still bound, but her eyes were alert. She'd heard voices. She knew trouble was coming. They will come, she said quietly. They think you took me. Elias knelt beside her bed. Then we'll tell them the truth. She shook her head slowly. Truth don't matter when blood remembers. That night, Elias stood at the window, watching the prairie under moonlight. The land was quiet, almost too quiet. Not a coyote's cry, not a whisper of wind. Boone pawed restlessly in the corral. Then, just before dawn, a faint glow appeared on the distant ridge. Another signal fire. One became two, then three. Elias exhaled slowly, his hand tightening on the window frame. The message was clear. The plains were awake, and eyes were watching from the dark. The following morning, the ranch woke to uneasy silence. The hands spoke in hushed tones, saddles creaking softly as men prepared for a day no one wanted to face. Word of the smoke signals had spread fast. Riders had been seen in the West Hills, and the tension hung over the place like storm clouds that refused to break. Elias Carter came into the house carrying a tray, broth, bread, and clean water. Naya sat upright on the bed now, the sunlight slanting across her face. Her wound had begun to heal, but her spirit seemed caught between gratitude and dread. When Elias entered, she watched him cautiously, as though still unsure what kind of man he truly was. He set the tray down gently. You should eat, he said. Keep your strength up. She hesitated, then reached for the bread. You save me, she said slowly, the words thick with accent. Why? Elias leaned against the doorframe, rubbing the back of his neck. Because no one deserves to die alone out there. That storm didn't care what color your skin was. She lowered her gaze, her fingers tracing the rim of the cup. For a long while, she said nothing. Then, in halting English, she began to speak, a few words at first, then more. Her voice trembling like a stream breaking through stone. She told him her name. Truly Naya, daughter of Chief Taza of the Apache. She and her people had been traveling south to trade when they were ambushed by a band of raiders, men neither white nor native, scavengers who hunted the weak. Her horse had been shot, her brother killed trying to defend her. She had fled into the storm, bleeding and blind, until the wind buried her. That was where Elias had found her. Elias listened in silence, jaw tight. He'd heard stories of raiders before, men who roamed the frontier taking scalps and loot from both sides. But hearing it from her lips made the stories real in a way no newspaper ever could. They kill my brother, she whispered, her voice breaking. He was strong, brave. But they take his horse, his knife, and leave him for crows. Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand. My people. They think white men did it. They come for answers. Elias's stomach sank. And when they find you here, they think you are the one who take me. She met his gaze then, steady, unflinching. You die for kindness. He let out a slow breath. Not if I can help it. He moved closer and sat on the edge of the bed. We'll find a way to tell them what happened. I'll ride out myself if I have to. Naya looked at him. Really looked. They not listen. When blood is spilled, ears close. Elias reached for his hat, staring toward the window where the plains stretched endless and pale beneath the sun. Then I guess I'll have to find another way to speak. For the first time, something softened in her eyes, the faintest glimmer of trust. She studied him quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. You fight for people not your own. That is not common here. He smiled faintly, weary but sincere. Maybe that's why I don't sleep easy. Outside, a hawk circled overhead, its shadow gliding across the grass. To the west, faint columns of smoke still drifted above the ridges, the same ridges where her people watched and waited. Before he left the room, Elias paused in the doorway. Rest easy, Naya. No one's going to harm you here. But as he stepped out, he caught the look in Cal's eyes, grim and uncertain. They're close, boss, Cal said quietly. Too close. I seen horses on the far ridge again. Elias's hand drifted to the rifle propped by the door. Then we keep calm, he said. We'll deal with this the right way. Behind him, Naya closed her eyes and whispered something in Apache. A prayer, a warning, or maybe both. And far out on the plain, unseen beyond the shimmering heat, a dozen riders shifted in silence, their eyes fixed on the Carter Ranch. By the next sunrise, every choice Elias made would carry the dawn came slow and colorless, the kind that carries no warmth. A thin mist lay low over the plains, and the usual sounds of morning, roosters crowing, wind sighing through the sage, were gone. The silence was heavy enough to make the ranch dogs uneasy. They paced the yard, hackles raised, barking at nothing but the horizon. Elias Carter stepped out onto the porch, the boards creaking under his boots. Something in his gut told him the waiting was over. The night before, Cal had spotted shapes moving among the hills. Too far to count, too quiet to call friendly, Elias had hoped they'd move on, that maybe Naya's people were only scouting. But when the first arrow struck the fence post near the corral, not fired to kill but to warn, he knew the circle had closed. By the time the sun crept above the bluffs, the signs were everywhere. Wisps of smoke rose in a ring around the valley. Small campfires, deliberately placed, marking ground. From the rooftop, Elias could see movement. Riders, some mounted, some on foot, stationed across the ridges. Not attacking, not advancing, just watching. He climbed down slowly, scanning the line of the horizon. The ranch wasn't just surrounded. It was contained, like prey waiting for judgment. Inside, Naya stood by the window, wrapped in one of Elias's coats. Her face was pale, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. When he entered, she didn't look away. They are here, she said simply. Her tone carried neither surprise nor fear, only resignation. Elias nodded grimly. I figured as much. They think you took me, she added softly. You must let me go. If they see me here, they'll kill you too, he interrupted. You're wounded. You couldn't ride half a mile. Her jaw tightened. Better I die by my people's hand than see more die because of me. Elias stepped closer. Not happening. I didn't save you just to hand you over to a war. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes shimmering like storm clouds. You do not understand. My father, he is Chief Taza. If he thinks you've taken me, he will not stop until the ground here burns. That name hit Elias like a hammer. He'd heard it before. Stories of the war chief whose warriors could ride for days without food, who never took prisoners. A man feared even by other tribes. Elias scrubbed a hand over his face. Then we've got one chance, he said finally. You talk to them. You tell them what happened. They won't listen if I come from your house, she said bitterly. They will see only shame. For a moment, neither spoke. The ticking of the clock in the next room filled the silence like a heartbeat. Then Elias sighed and looked toward the window. Then I'll ride with you. We'll meet them together. Let them see I've got no chains on you, no reason to hide. Naya's eyes widened. If you ride with me, they'll kill you before you speak. Maybe, he said, reaching for his hat. But maybe not. Maybe they'll see I mean no harm. Before they could argue further, one of the ranch hands burst through the door. Mr. Carter, you'd better come see this. Elias and Naya stepped outside. What they saw froze the breath in their lungs. Across the field, on every ridge and hollow, mounted warriors had appeared. Dozens, maybe 100. They sat motionless on their horses, their faces painted, the feathers in their hair flickering like embers in the wind. The ranch was surrounded in a perfect circle, silent, unbroken, impenetrable. Naya whispered something in Apache, her voice trembling. "What's that mean?" Elias asked. She swallowed. "It means, the spirits have seen us. There will be no hiding now." The sun rose higher, gilding the plains in gold, but no bird sang, no rider moved. Only the slow beat of the wind against the dry grass filled the air. And in that fragile stillness, Elias understood. Every choice he made from this moment on would decide not only his fate, but the fate of everyone on his ranch. By the next dawn, peace or blood would rule the plains. The morning sun climbed higher, but it brought no warmth, only light that cut across the plains like a blade. Every ridge, every rise around the Carter Ranch shimmered with movement. Horses snorted softly in the distance. The faint clink of metal carried on the wind. The Apache had come not as raiders, but as a silent army. They surrounded the ranch in perfect formation, watchful, waiting for the first wrong move. Elias Carter stood at the porch rail, rifle in hand but lowered. The barrel gleamed dull in the sun. Around him, his men paced nervously. Cal, his foreman, loaded shells into a shotgun with hands that weren't quite steady. "We can't just stand here," he muttered. "They'll hit us soon as the sun's full up." Elias didn't answer. His gaze swept the horizon, studying the riders. They hadn't advanced. That, he thought, was both good and bad. It meant they weren't eager for blood, but they weren't leaving either. Inside the house, Naya stood at the window, watching her people through the thin glass. She looked smaller now, wrapped in Elias's coat, her dark eyes filled with guilt and dread. "They won't stop," she whispered when Elias came in. "They think you took me, maybe killed others. My father leads them. He will not turn back without seeing me." Elias set the rifle down gently. "Then we have to make him see you alive." She shook her head. "If I ride out alone, they'll think I've been forced. If I go with you, they'll think you're using me as shield. Either way, there will be blood." He ran a hand over his face, weary but resolute. "There's got to be another way. You know them, and what would make them listen?" Her eyes filled with sadness. "Truth doesn't matter when hearts burn. Only courage speaks then." Outside, a horse neighed sharply, a signal. A single rider broke from the western ridge and rode halfway toward the ranch, stopping within bowshot. He carried a spear tipped with eagle feathers, a messenger's mark. The horse pranced nervously, and the rider raised his hand, palm open. Cal cursed under his breath. "What's that mean?" "It means," Naya said softly, "they're asking for the man who holds me." Elias glanced at her, then at the men. "Get everyone inside. Lock the barn. Nobody fires unless I say." He took his hat, squared his shoulders, and stepped out onto the dirt yard alone. The air shimmered with heat and fear. The messenger watched him approach, his face unreadable beneath the streaks of white and ochre paint. He spoke in Apache first, fast, harsh. Naya came out behind Elias before he could answer, limping but determined. She raised her voice in the same language, her words urgent. Elias couldn't understand the meaning, but he caught her tone, pleading, explaining, commanding. The messenger's eyes widened when he saw her alive. For a long moment he stared, then lowered his spear and nodded once before turning his horse and galloping back toward the ridge. Elias turned to Naya. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you saved me," she said quietly. "That I ride by choice," he frowned. "Will that be enough?" She hesitated. "No, my father will come himself now. He will need to look in your eyes to see truth." Hours passed in agonizing stillness. The sun crawled across the sky, shadows stretching long. Every man on the ranch was ready for a fight that hadn't started, yet. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Just before dusk, the watchers shifted. A figure emerged from the western rise, older, broad-shouldered, draped in a robe of wolf hide. His face was lined with years and sorrow. At his side rode two warriors bearing long spears tipped with obsidian. Naya's breath caught. "My father," she whispered. Elias stepped forward to meet him, unarmed, his palms open. Around them, rifles were cocked, bows drawn, yet no one moved. The air between them trembled with danger and something deeper, the weight of two worlds about to collide. Naya limped forward to stand beside him, her hand gripping his arm for balance. "If we do not speak true now," she said under her breath, "the plains will drink blood before morning." The sun sank low, painting the land in gold and crimson. The riders shifted like restless shadows. And there, in the middle of the dying light, Elias Carter faced the chief of the Apache, the father of the woman he had saved, knowing that a single word could decide life or death. The wind had gone still by the time Chief Taza and his warriors reached the open plain before the ranch. The setting sun bled red and gold across the horizon, throwing long shadows that stretched like fingers toward the house. Elias Carter stood firm, hat in hand, boots planted in the dust, his eyes fixed on the approaching riders. The chief dismounted slowly, every motion deliberate. He was a tall man, his age marked not by weakness but by gravity, the kind of presence that filled the space around him. His black hair, streaked with silver, was braided and tied with eagle feathers. Around his shoulders hung a wolf pelt, its head resting on his chest like a guardian spirit. His gaze swept over the ranch, the men, and finally Elias, sharp, cold, and searching. Behind him, Naya stood trembling, her fingers clutching the edge of Elias's sleeve. When her father's eyes found her, something in them flickered. Not surprise, but the painful confirmation of what he had feared. She took a step forward, her voice breaking the silence. "Father," she said in Apache, her tone both pleading and respectful. "It is I. I live," the warriors murmured among themselves, some lowering their weapons slightly. Taza, however, remained still. "You stand in the house of a white man," he said in their tongue, his voice deep as thunder. "Why?" Elias couldn't understand the words, but he could feel their weight. He stayed still, his hands visible, his heart hammering against his ribs. Naya turned toward him, her eyes desperate. "He asks why I'm here," she translated. "He thinks you took me." Elias nodded slightly. "Then tell him the truth." She spoke rapidly, her voice urgent. She told her father of the storm, of how she'd been left for dead by raiders, of the man who found her buried in the dust and carried her to safety. She told him Elias had treated her wounds, fed her, and asked for nothing in return. But Taza's eyes never softened. "The white man lies easily," he said coldly. "Always his tongue speaks peace while his hand reaches for the rifle." Elias took a slow breath and stepped forward, unarmed. "Tell him I don't want to fight," he said quietly. "Tell him he can search my house, my barns, my soul if he wants. He'll find no chains, no harm done." Naya translated, her voice trembling. The chief listened in silence, then motioned for one of his men. Two warriors dismounted and entered the ranch house. Moments later, they returned, holding the empty rifle from Elias's wall, the one he'd left behind. "They find your weapon," Naya said softly. "Then show him it's clean," Elias replied. He took the rifle gently, broke it open, and held it out for the chief to see. Not a drop of blood, not a spent shell. Only dust and oil. Something shifted in the crowd. Murmurs again, uncertain this time. Taza's expression didn't change, but his silence lengthened. The sun dipped lower, casting the whole plain in bronze light. Then Taza spoke again, this time not to his daughter, but to Elias. "If your heart is clean," he said. His English rough but clear, "then you will prove it. You will walk into our camp alone." Elias didn't hesitate. "Tell him I will." Naya grabbed his arm, fear flashing across her face. "If you go, you may not return. They will test you." "I reckon a man's word don't mean much if he won't stand by it," Elias said quietly. "Tell him I'm coming." Taza turned and mounted again, his eyes never leaving Elias. He raised a hand, a signal. The riders began to move, the ring around the ranch breaking apart into two columns that melted back toward the bluffs. As their silhouettes faded against the dusk, the stillness returned, deeper now, heavier. Naya faced Elias, her expression caught between awe and terror. "You walk between two worlds now," she said softly, "and neither will forgive you if you fall." Elias looked out across the plains, where the fires of the Apache camp were already starting to glow in the distance. "Then I'd best not fall," he murmured, and as darkness claimed the horizon, the lone rancher stepped into the gathering night, toward judgment, toward truth, and perhaps toward the end of everything he'd ever known. Night had fallen by the time Elias Carter reached the Apache camp. The land glowed with the light of scattered fires, their smoke curling up into a dark, star-pocked sky. Shadows moved between the tents, silent, watchful shapes. Horses stood tethered in a ring around the camp's edge, their ears flicking toward every sound. Elias rode slowly, his hands away from his holster. He could feel their eyes on him, dozens of them, fierce, distrustful, curious. The air was thick with the smell of smoke, sage, and sweat. Each flicker of firelight showed faces painted for war, women clutching their children, and old men whose silence was heavier than any threat. At the center of the camp stood Chief Taza, waiting beside a great fire. His wolf pelt glistened with amber light, his face a sculpture of patience and power. Naya stood behind him, her wrists bound, not cruelly, but as a symbol of protection and possession. Elias's heart tightened at the sight, but he kept his voice calm when he spoke. "You said I'd come alone," Elias said, his tone low but steady. "And here I am." Taza regarded him in silence for a long moment before answering. "You come where no white man walks and breathes," he said in careful English. "You say you saved my daughter. Why?" Elias hesitated. The truth felt simple to him, too simple to survive translation. "Because she needed help," he said. "Because I couldn't ride past and leave her to die." The chief's expression didn't change. "Many of your kind ride past or ride over. Why are you different?" Elias took a slow breath. The fire cracked between them, sparks rising like restless spirits. "Maybe I ain't," he admitted. "But I know what it's like to lose someone. I buried a wife and son when the fever took them. I couldn't watch another soul go under the dirt if I could stop it." For the first time, something flickered behind the chief's stern eyes. Recognition. Perhaps, or pity, though it passed as quickly as it came. "Words are light," Taza said. "They shine easy and fade quick. Deeds are stone." He turned to one of his warriors and gave an order in Apache. The man disappeared into the dark, returning moments later with a battered boy no older than 10, limping, his arm wrapped tight with a bloody cloth. "This one was hurt by white men near the river," Taza said. "You say you heal, not harm. Then heal him." The test was clear. Elias knelt beside the boy, his heart thudding. He tore open the ragged bandage. The wound was deep but clean, a gash from a blade, not infection yet, but close. The boy's face was tight with pain, his breath shallow. Elias worked in silence, using the small satchel he'd carried from the ranch, cloth, whiskey, thread, and a knife. The Apache watched closely as he cleaned and stitched the wound. He spoke softly to the boy, not in words he'd understand, but in the calm rhythm of a man who'd once comforted his own child. The boy trembled but didn't cry out. When it was done, Elias tied the bandage clean and firm. Taza crouched beside them, studying the wound. He touched the cloth lightly, then looked up at Elias. "He will live," the chief said. "If the wound stays clean," Elias replied. "Keep him dry, keep him still. He'll be running again in a week." The chief rose. Around them, murmurs rippled through the warriors, something between surprise and approval. But Taza's face remained unreadable. "You did what you said," he said. "But a single good deed does not erase 100 wrongs done by your people." "I ain't here to speak for my people," Elias said, meeting his gaze. "Only for myself." The night air held stillness again, deep, fragile, dangerous. The chief's eyes lingered on him for a long, unreadable moment. Finally, he nodded once. "You will stay," he said, "until the sun rises. Then I will decide." 2 warriors stepped forward and motioned for Elias to follow. They led him to the edge of the camp, where a small fire burned alone beneath the stars. As Elias sat there, the plains spread silent around him, and in the distance, he could see the faint outline of his ranch, a single light still burning in the house. Naya's light. He didn't know if it was hope or warning, but he knew this. By sunrise, the night passed slow and heavy. Elias Carter sat by the small fire the Apache had left for him, his hands bound but not cruelly, his rifle taken. The air was sharp with cold, the kind that seeped into bone and thought. Every sound, the rustle of a horse, the crackle of embers, the cry of an owl, felt too loud, too close. He had faced storms, debt, and death before, but nothing like this quiet. This was the silence of judgment, the space before fate made its choice. Just beyond the ring of light, he could see faint shapes, warriors keeping watch, faces hidden but eyes fixed on him. They didn't speak, didn't move much. They were like shadows born from the firelight itself. Elias didn't blame them. If their world had been turned upside down by men who looked like him, maybe he'd be the same. Near midnight, the sound of soft footsteps came from the dark. Naya appeared, her wrists free now, her long hair loose, catching the faint glow of the fire. She knelt beside him, her voice low. "They let me come," she whispered. "My father listens to the elders now. Some want to kill you. Some say the spirits spared you for a reason." Elias gave a wry smile. "Reckon I'd prefer the spirit side of things." Her lips trembled at that, half a smile, half sorrow. "You shouldn't have come here. They test you not because they doubt your heart, but because they fear what mercy means. If you live, they must see your life as a sign. And signs, they divide people." Elias stared into the fire. "Peace always costs something," he said quietly. "Maybe this time it costs me." She reached out and touched his hand where the rope bound him. "You gave me life. If they take yours, I will never forgive them, or myself." Before he could answer, a horn sounded low and mournful through the camp. Figures emerged from the dark, Chief Taza, the elders, and several warriors carrying burning torches. The glow painted their faces in shifting light and shadow, like spirits in motion. The chief spoke first, in Apache, his tone deep and solemn. Naya translated softly, her words trembling. "He says the council has spoken. You may go free, if you pay the price of peace." Elias frowned. "And what price is that?" Taza's gaze fixed on him, cold and unwavering. "You will give your land," Naya translated. "The ranch, the fences, the fields. You will leave and not return. That ground will be sacred again. No plows, no guns, no white men's borders." Elias's breath caught. The ranch wasn't just land. It was years of toil, sweat, and buried memories. It was his wife's grave, his son's laughter in the fields. It was everything he had left of them. He swallowed hard, his throat thick. "That land's all I've got," he said. "It's my home." Naya's eyes filled with tears. "He says mercy must be earned. You took me from the plains. Now the plains take you from your home." For a long moment, Elias said nothing. The fire popped, and the sound echoed like a gunshot in the stillness. Then he nodded slowly. "If that's the cost to keep blood off this soil," he said, voice low but steady, "then I'll pay it. But I'll do it on one condition." Taza's eyes narrowed. "What condition?" "Let her choose," Elias said. "If she wants to stay here with her people, I'll ride away and never look back. But if she wants to come with me, you'll let her walk free." A murmur rippled through the warriors, sharp, uncertain. Taza's face darkened, the lines in his skin deepening like cracks in stone. "You dare bargain?" "I dare speak truth," Elias said. "A man can lose a home and rebuild. But you can't cage another soul. Not and call it honor." The chief stared at him for a long, burning silence. Then he spoke to Naya in a voice that trembled like distant thunder. She turned to Elias, tears streaking her face. "He says, the dawn will decide. When the sun rises, I must choose where I belong." And with that, the chief turned and walked into the darkness, his warriors following, leaving Elias and Naya by the dying fire. Neither spoke for a long time. The night was still again, save for the soft breath of wind through the grass. Elias looked toward the east, where the first faint line of light was just beginning to touch the horizon. "Guess the sun's got a hard choice to make," he murmured. Naya's hand found his, trembling. "No," she whispered. "I do." The horizon was only a faint pale line when Elias Carter lifted his eyes from the dying fire. The world felt hushed, wrapped in that fragile stillness that comes just before dawn. He could hear the distant murmur of the Apache camp waking, the shuffle of feet, the snort of horses, the creak of leather. He had slept little, if at all. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the plains, not as they were, but as they might become. Empty without the house, the corral, the cattle he'd raised with his own hands. A man could rebuild a fence, but not the memories laid in that soil. Still, he'd made his peace. His word was given, and his choice clear. Now the only question left belonged to her. Naya sat nearby, wrapped in a blanket, her face turned toward the east. The first light touched her hair like a crown of copper. She hadn't spoken since her father's decree. When Elias finally broke the silence, his voice was rough with sleeplessness. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. "If you stay here, you'll be safe. You'll have your people." She turned to him, her dark eyes steady. "And you?" He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I'll ride. There's always more land somewhere, more work to be done." He paused. "A man can't own the earth anyhow. Not really. We just borrow it till the dust takes us back." Naya watched him for a long moment, her fingers tightening on the edge of the blanket. "You speak like one who has lost everything before," she said softly. "I have," he answered. "But somehow I keep finding reasons to start again." The wind stirred then, a low whisper across the plains. In the distance, the Apache drums began, slow and deep, marking the coming of dawn. The tribe gathered in a wide circle around the central fire, their faces turned toward the light. Chief Taza stood at the center, his figure tall and solemn against the rising sun. He raised his hand toward Elias. "Come," he said. Elias rose, brushing the dust from his coat, and walked with measured steps to the circle. Naya followed close behind. The chief's eyes flicked between them, his face unreadable. "The sun rises," he said. "The choice is upon us." He looked to his daughter. "You may go with him and live as the white do, their laws, their hunger, their loneliness. Or you may stay, and the spirits of your mothers will guard you. But you cannot walk in both worlds." The circle was silent. Even the drums stopped. Every eye turned to Naya. She stepped forward, her hands trembling, her voice barely above a whisper. "All my life I have walked between worlds," she said. "My heart does not belong to one or the other, it belongs to both. He saved my life, but he did not claim it. You gave me life, Father, but you cannot bind it." Taza's jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. "I choose," she faltered, then found her breath again. "I choose to walk beside him, not as captive, not as lost daughter, but as a bridge between hearts that have forgotten how to listen." A murmur ran through the circle, disbelief, anger, sorrow. The chief's face was stone for a long, unbearable moment. Then slowly he turned to Elias. "You take her people's burden too," he said. "If there is blood again between our kind, your name will carry its weight." Elias bowed his head. "I'll bear it," he said simply. Taza looked at his daughter once more, 1,000 unspoken memories in his eyes, and then turned away. "Go," he said. Naya's breath broke into a sob, but she caught it in her throat. She took Elias's hand, and together they walked through the ring of warriors, through the dust and the firelight, into the open plains where the first full rays of dawn stretched across the world. Behind them, the camp faded, voices, drums, all swallowed by distance. Ahead lay nothing but sky and horizon, uncertain, unforgiving, and free. As the sun climbed, Naya looked at him. "You gave up your home," she said. He glanced at her, his rough smile softening. "Maybe not. Maybe I just found it again." And so they rode on, side by side, two souls bound not by blood or land, but by the fragile peace they had bought, not with victory, but with grace. The plains shimmered gold around them. The wind carried their silence forward. And somewhere behind, the world they'd changed began.